Case 1. October 21, 2021, San Diego, California. Ali Abulabin, a 26-year-old TikTok comedian known online as Jin Kid, was identified as the suspect after two people were found shot inside a downtown apartment. Police confirmed that the victims were Abulabin's estranged wife, Anna Abulabin, and a male acquaintance. According to investigators, the first signs of trouble appeared when gunshots were reported by nearby residents. Within hours, attention turned toward Abulabin, whose relationship with his wife had recently collapsed under escalating personal conflict. The case began shortly after midday when emergency services received multiple calls reporting gunfire inside an apartment complex in San Diego. Officers arrived to find two adults deceased from gunshot wounds inside an upstairs unit. The scene showed no signs of forced entry, indicating the shooter had access to the residence. Paramedics confirmed both victims were dead at the scene. Initial statements from witnesses placed a man matching Ali Abulabin's description entering and leaving the apartment around the time of the shooting. Investigators learned that Anna Abulabin had been living separately from her husband and had allowed a guest into the apartment that afternoon. Police quickly began canvassing the area and reviewing building access logs, but the physical evidence inside the apartment raised questions that did not align with any claim of a spontaneous encounter. Ali Abulabin had built a sizable online following through short-form comedy videos and celebrity impressions, presenting a light-hearted public image to nearly 1 million followers. Privately, his marriage had deteriorated amid repeated arguments and allegations of controlling behavior. Friends later confirmed the couple had separated, though they remained in contact due to their young child. In the weeks leading up to the shooting, Abulabin reportedly monitored his wife's movements closely and expressed distress over the separation. Anna Abulabin was attempting to move forward independently, a decision that intensified the strain between them. Their domestic situation, once largely private, would soon become central to a criminal investigation that unraveled rapidly. Detectives recovered electronic devices linked to both the suspect and the victims, including an iPad connected to Abulabin's account. Forensic analysis revealed the device had been used to remotely monitor audio from the apartment. Investigators also traced Abulabin's vehicle movements on the day of the shooting, placing him near the apartment complex shortly before the emergency calls. A firearm consistent with the bullets recovered at the scene was later located. Surveillance footage from surrounding areas showed Abulabin entering the building and leaving minutes later. The sequence of digital records and physical evidence created a clear timeline that contradicted any explanation of coincidence or chance. Later that same day, Ali Abulabin was taken into custody without resistance. During questioning, he made statements acknowledging his presence at the apartment. Prosecutors later detailed how he had driven to the location after remotely listening in on the apartment, armed himself, and confronted the occupants. The evidence included digital surveillance data, vehicle tracking, and ballistic confirmation. Authorities concluded the actions showed preparation rather than impulsive behavior. When confronted with the compiled evidence, Abulabin's account shifted, reinforcing the prosecution's position that the killings were intentional and planned in advance. The case proceeded through the California court system amid widespread public attention. Prosecutors charged Abulabin with 2 counts of first-degree murder, along with firearm enhancements. The defense argued diminished responsibility, but the jury rejected those claims after reviewing the digital surveillance evidence and reconstructed timeline. In 2024, Abulabin was found guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, plus additional years for firearm use. The court concluded that the evidence supported deliberate intent. The legal outcome closed the case, though the underlying motive remained a subject of continued examination. Case 2. February 11, 2022, Leicestershire, England. Mahek Bukhari, a 24-year-old TikTok influencer, became central to a fatal motorway crash investigation after two young men were killed in a burning vehicle. What initially appeared to be a high-speed accident on a rural road quickly drew police attention due to emergency calls made during the incident. Within hours, investigators began treating the crash as a targeted pursuit rather than a loss of control, shifting focus toward Bukhari and those close to her. The case began late at night when emergency services received multiple distress calls from a moving vehicle on the A46 dual carriageway. The caller reported being chased by several cars and stated that the occupants believed they were about to be killed. Minutes later, police were dispatched to reports of a serious collision. At the scene, a silver Skoda had left the carriageway, struck a central barrier, and burst into flames. Fire crews extinguished the blaze, but both occupants were pronounced dead at the scene. Initial assessments suggested the vehicle had been forced off the road at high speed. Skid marks, debris patterns, and witness accounts indicated that the crash was not accidental. The evidence immediately raised doubts about the circumstances leading up to the collision. The victims, Saqib Hussain and Hashim Ijazuddin, were both in their early 20s and known to have prior contact with Mahek Bukhari and her mother. Investigators later established that Saqib had been involved in a secret relationship with Bukhari's mother, which ended badly. Following the breakdown of that relationship, Saqib allegedly threatened to expose private messages and images. Prosecutors stated that Bukhari feared reputational damage and public embarrassment. Instead of reporting the matter to authorities, she and her mother remained in contact with Saqib, arranging a late-night meeting under the pretense of resolving the dispute. That decision placed all parties on a collision course that would unravel rapidly. Police recovered mobile phones from the wreckage and obtained call logs showing ongoing communication between the victims and Bukhari shortly before the crash. Vehicle tracking data placed multiple cars traveling together along the A46 at high speed. Witnesses reported seeing at least two vehicles closely pursuing the Skoda moments before it left the road. Forensic examination revealed impact damage consistent with the Skoda being struck from behind. Investigators also analyzed the emergency call made during the chase, which captured the victims' fear and confirmed they were being followed. Combined, the phone records, tracking data, and physical evidence established a clear pattern of pursuit. Within days, police executed coordinated arrests across multiple locations. Mahek Bukhari, her mother, and several associates were taken into custody on suspicion of murder. Prosecutors later outlined how the group had used two vehicles to box in the victim's car and force it off the carriageway. Digital evidence showed planning and coordination before the meeting. The reconstruction of events demonstrated that the crash was the final outcome of a deliberate confrontation rather than an unintended consequence. When presented with the full timeline, authorities concluded that the actions of those involved directly led to the deaths. The trial took place in the United Kingdom amid intense media scrutiny. Prosecutors presented the emergency call, vehicle data, and witness testimony to establish intent. In 2023, the jury returned guilty verdicts against Mahek Bukhari and her mother for murder. The court imposed life sentences, with lengthy minimum terms before parole eligibility. Several co-defendants received substantial prison sentences for their roles. The case prompted national discussion about social media image, accountability, and the consequences of private disputes escalating into violence. The legal outcome brought the proceedings to an end, though the case remains a reference point in discussions of influencer culture and criminal responsibility. Case 3. August 30, 2023, Ivins, Utah. Ruby Frank, a family YouTuber with millions of subscribers, was arrested after a malnourished child escaped from a residence and sought help from a nearby home. Authorities identified Frank as the child's mother and a prominent online figure known for documenting family life. The situation immediately raised concerns among responding officers. Within hours, what began as a welfare call expanded into a criminal investigation centered on prolonged abuse inside a household, once presented online as stable and disciplined. The case began when local police received a call reporting a child knocking on a neighbor's door asking for food and water. Officers arrived to find the child visibly underweight, with open wounds and signs of physical restraint. Emergency medical services transported the child to a hospital for treatment. Based on the condition observed, police conducted a welfare check at a nearby residence connected to Ruby Frank and her associate. Inside, officers located another minor in similar condition. Both children were placed into protective custody. Ruby Frank and an adult associate were taken into custody the same day. The speed and severity of the response reflected immediate concern that the injuries were not accidental or recent. Ruby Frank had built a large audience through her YouTube channel, which focused on strict parenting, discipline, and family routines. For years, viewers watched her raise 6 children while promoting firm behavioral control as a moral framework. Over time, some content raised concern among viewers, including statements about withholding food or isolating children as punishment. These moments did not result in formal intervention at the time. Behind the scenes, Frank had become involved with an external counseling ideology that reinforced extreme discipline practices. The children featured in her content were largely isolated from extended family and outside oversight, creating conditions that allowed harmful behavior to escalate without interruption. Medical evaluations documented severe malnutrition, untreated injuries, and signs consistent with prolonged neglect. Investigators examined the residence and noted conditions inconsistent with basic care standards. Digital records, including videos, communications, and journals, were reviewed to establish timelines and behavioral patterns. Authorities identified evidence that discipline methods were systematic rather than isolated incidents. Online content was analyzed alongside private communications to compare public presentation with internal practices. The findings indicated a sustained pattern of abuse that contradicted the family-focused image presented to millions of viewers. Following her arrest, Ruby Frank remained in custody as prosecutors reviewed charges. In early 2024, she entered a plea agreement, formally admitting guilt to multiple counts of aggravated child abuse. The plea eliminated the need for a prolonged trial and secured convictions based on her own admissions. Prosecutors stated the agreement reflected the strength of the evidence and spared the children from further courtroom exposure. The admissions confirmed that the abuse was intentional and extended over time, rather than the result of misjudgment or misunderstanding. The court outlined potential sentencing ranges under Utah law, exposing Frank to decades of incarceration depending on how sentences were applied. The case triggered widespread public reaction and renewed scrutiny of family vlogging practices. Legislators, child welfare advocates, and media organizations debated whether existing safeguards were sufficient to protect children featured in monetized online content. Ruby Frank's YouTube presence ended permanently. The legal process closed one chapter of the case, but broader questions about platform responsibility and child protection in digital media remain unresolved. Case 4. January 27, 2022, Delray Beach, Florida. Noah Gall, a 17-year-old social media personality known for high-speed driving content, was identified as the driver in a crash that killed 6 people. Authorities confirmed that the collision occurred on a major roadway during nighttime hours. What initially appeared to be a catastrophic traffic accident quickly drew scrutiny due to the extreme speed involved. Within hours, investigators began examining Gall's online activity, shifting the case from a routine crash inquiry to a criminal investigation. The incident occurred on U.S. Highway 441, when Gall's vehicle collided with the rear of an SUV carrying 6 occupants. First responders arrived to find both vehicles severely damaged, with debris scattered across multiple lanes. The SUV had been crushed on impact, and all 6 occupants were pronounced dead at the scene. Gall was transported to a hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. Traffic investigators noted extensive damage patterns consistent with an unusually high rate of speed. Road closures remained in place for hours as forensic teams documented skid marks, vehicle positions, and impact points. Early findings suggested the collision was not caused by weather, road conditions, or mechanical failure, raising immediate questions about driver behavior. Gall had developed a following on TikTok and Instagram by posting videos that showcased rapid acceleration, racing challenges, and luxury vehicles. Some content encouraged viewers to guess his speed, reinforcing a pattern of reckless driving for online attention. Investigators later identified the victims as migrant farm workers traveling together after a day of labor. They had no connection to Gall and were unaware of his presence before the collision. The contrast between Gall's online stunt culture and the routine lives of the victims underscored the random nature of the tragedy. Their deaths resulted solely from being in the path of a vehicle traveling at extreme speed. Data retrieved from Gall's vehicle and mobile phone revealed speed readings far exceeding legal limits. Crash reconstruction experts calculated that his car had been traveling at more than 150 miles per hour seconds before impact. Investigators also recovered videos from Gall's phone and social media accounts that documented prior high-speed driving on public roads. These recordings established a pattern of behavior rather than a single lapse in judgment. Forensic analysis confirmed that braking occurred too late to avoid impact, supporting conclusions that the crash was unavoidable once the speed threshold had been crossed. Although Gall was a minor at the time of the crash, prosecutors sought to have him charged as an adult due to the number of fatalities and the severity of the conduct. The court approved the request. Gall was charged with 6 counts of vehicular homicide. After extended legal proceedings, he entered a guilty plea to all counts, avoiding a full trial. The plea acknowledged responsibility for the deaths and confirmed that the driving behavior directly caused the collision. Prosecutors stated the plea reflected the strength of the physical and digital evidence. The court imposed a prison sentence followed by a lengthy term of probation, reflecting both punishment and future supervision. The sentencing included restrictions intended to prevent any return to reckless driving behavior. The case prompted public discussion about social media influence, teenage risk-taking, and roadway safety. Law enforcement agencies cited the incident in renewed campaigns against street racing and speed-related content online. The legal outcome closed the criminal case, but the deaths of 6 individuals continued to influence policy conversations about accountability and the consequences of dangerous online trends. Case 5. September 2020, United States. Jeremiah Harris, a reality television personality known for his appearance on a popular cheerleading series, became the subject of a federal investigation after reports of unlawful online contact surfaced. Harris, whose public image was built around positivity and encouragement, was widely recognized by a young fan base. When allegations emerged involving minors, authorities moved quickly. Within weeks, the attention surrounding his media success shifted toward an inquiry that would dismantle his public persona. The case began when federal authorities received reports alleging inappropriate online communication between Harris and underage individuals. Investigators initiated a review of digital accounts linked to Harris, including social media platforms and messaging applications. As evidence accumulated, federal agents obtained warrants to seize electronic devices connected to him. In September 2020, Harris was taken into custody and formally charged following his arrest. The timing of the arrest, occurring shortly after the height of his public recognition, underscored the seriousness of the allegations. Prosecutors stated that the investigation revealed a pattern of conduct rather than isolated incidents. The arrest marked a decisive shift from public speculation to formal criminal proceedings. Jeremiah Harris rose to national attention through his role on a competitive cheerleading team featured in a streaming documentary series. His personality, enthusiasm, and on-screen presence made him one of the most recognizable figures associated with the show. As his popularity increased, so did his influence over young fans who followed him on social media. He participated in public appearances, endorsements, and events that expanded his reach beyond the program itself. That influence became a central concern for investigators, as the individuals involved in the allegations were part of the same demographic that made up a significant portion of his audience. Federal investigators analyzed digital communications recovered from Harris's devices and online accounts. The evidence included messages, images, and exchanges that prosecutors later described as explicit and unlawful. Digital forensic specialists traced timelines showing repeated contact with minors across multiple platforms. Authorities documented how Harris allegedly used his public status to initiate and maintain those interactions. The findings were compiled into a detailed evidentiary record, establishing consistency between victim reports and the recovered data. The scope of the material reinforced the federal decision to pursue felony charges. In early 2022, Harris entered a guilty plea to federal charges related to unlawful online conduct involving minors. The plea acknowledged responsibility and eliminated the need for a lengthy trial. During court proceedings, prosecutors outlined the extent of the evidence and the impact on victims. The court accepted the plea after reviewing the investigative record. The admission confirmed that the conduct had occurred over a defined period and involved multiple instances rather than a single event. The sentencing phase concluded with the court imposing a 12-year term in federal prison, followed by a period of supervised release. The judge cited abuse of trust and misuse of influence as key factors in determining the sentence. The outcome prompted significant reaction within the entertainment and sports communities associated with the series. Production companies and sponsors distanced themselves from Harris, and discussions emerged regarding safeguards for young participants and fans. The case marked a definitive end to Harris's public career, leaving a lasting impact on how celebrity influence and accountability are viewed within youth-focused media. Case 6. June 2020, Dubai. Ramon Abbas, an Instagram personality known globally as Hushpuppy, was arrested during a coordinated international fraud operation. Abbas had built an online image centered on extreme luxury, regularly displaying designer clothing, exotic cars, and private travel to millions of followers. When authorities moved in on his Dubai residence, the arrest marked a sudden collapse of a persona that had projected wealth and influence. Within hours, investigators confirmed that the lifestyle presented online was closely tied to a complex web of financial crimes spanning multiple countries. The case began in the early hours of June 2020 when Dubai authorities, acting on information shared by U.S. federal agencies, carried out a raid on a luxury apartment complex. Officers entered Abbas' residence and seized laptops, smartphones, hard drives, and documents believed to be connected to large-scale financial fraud. Luxury vehicles parked outside the building were also examined. The operation was conducted simultaneously with arrests of other suspected members of the network. Initial reviews of the seized digital devices revealed encrypted communications, transaction records, and evidence of coordinated scams. The scale of the operation immediately suggested that Abbas was not acting alone, but as part of a structured criminal enterprise. Online, Abbas presented himself as a self-made millionaire who had achieved success through business ventures and investments. His Instagram account showcased constant travel, high-end shopping, and exclusive experiences, reinforcing an image of effortless wealth. Investigators later established that these displays were not funded by legitimate income. Instead, prosecutors stated that Abbas derived his money from business email compromise schemes and wire fraud. Victims included corporations, financial institutions, and private individuals across several countries. The contrast between his public image and the underlying source of his income became a defining feature of the case. The investigation traced money flows through international bank accounts, shell companies, and cryptocurrency transactions. FBI analysts mapped communications between Abbas and co-conspirators, documenting coordinated efforts to impersonate executives, intercept business communications, and redirect payments. In one case, the network attempted to steal more than $100 million from a foreign sports organization. Financial records showed repeated laundering of illicit funds through overseas accounts before being converted into luxury assets. The findings confirmed Abbas' central role in managing and distributing proceeds from the fraud schemes. Following his arrest in Dubai, Abbas was extradited to the United States to face federal charges. In U.S. court, prosecutors presented detailed financial records and digital evidence linking him directly to the conspiracy. Abbas later entered a guilty plea to charges of conspiracy to engage in money laundering. The plea acknowledged his participation in the fraud network and his role in facilitating the movement of stolen funds. The admission streamlined the case and avoided a prolonged trial, allowing sentencing to proceed based on the established record. In November 2022, a federal judge sentenced Ramon Abbas to approximately 11 years in prison. The court also ordered him to pay restitution to identified victims and forfeit assets obtained through criminal activity. The sentence reflected both the financial scale of the fraud and the level of coordination involved. The case drew international attention and became a reference point in discussions about social media, perceived wealth, and online deception. Abbas' online presence ended permanently, leaving behind a cautionary example of how digital influence was used to conceal extensive financial crime. Case 7. June 2017, Illinois. Austin Jones, a YouTube musician known for vocal covers and original songs, was arrested following a federal investigation into unlawful online conduct. Jones had built a substantial audience over several years, much of it composed of teenagers. His public image centered on music and accessibility, reinforced through frequent engagement with fans online. When federal authorities confirmed his arrest, the focus shifted rapidly from his online career to the nature of his private communications, marking the beginning of a criminal case with national attention. The case began after federal investigators received reports concerning Jones's interactions with underage fans through social media and messaging platforms. The FBI initiated an inquiry, reviewing complaints and securing digital records connected to his accounts. As the investigation progressed, agents obtained warrants to examine electronic devices and online data. In June 2017, Jones W. as formally charged and taken into custody. Prosecutors stated that the evidence gathered during the inquiry indicated repeated conduct rather than a single exchange. The arrest transformed what had been online allegations into a federal criminal proceeding. Austin Jones had started uploading videos to YouTube in his mid-teens, gradually building a following through music content that appealed to younger viewers. His channel gained momentum during the platform's early growth period, eventually reaching hundreds of thousands of subscribers. Live performances and fan meetups expanded his visibility beyond the internet. The demographic composition of his audience became a central concern once allegations surfaced, as many followers were minors. Investigators later emphasized that the same accessibility that fueled his popularity also allowed inappropriate contact to occur without immediate oversight. Federal agents collected digital evidence that included messages, images, and communications sent through multiple platforms. Victim reports described repeated contact initiated by Jones, often leveraging his status as a creator to sustain communication. Forensic analysis established timelines that matched victim statements with recovered data. The consistency between accounts and electronic records strengthened the prosecution's case. Authorities concluded that the interactions violated federal law governing online conduct with minors, leading to multiple felony charges. In 2019, Austin Jones entered a guilty plea to a federal charge related to the receipt of unlawful material involving minors. The plea acknowledged responsibility and eliminated the need for a trial. During the sentencing hearing, prosecutors outlined the scope of the conduct and its impact on victims. The court reviewed the investigative findings, including the duration of the behavior and the number of individuals affected. The plea agreement positioned the case for sentencing based on documented evidence rather than contested testimony. The court sentenced Jones to 10 years in federal prison, followed by supervised release with strict conditions. The ruling brought an end to his YouTube career and resulted in the removal of much of his content from major platforms. The case contributed to broader discussions about creator accountability and audience safety. In response, platforms cited the need for stronger reporting tools and oversight mechanisms. The legal outcome closed the case, while reinforcing the risks associated with unmonitored online influence. Case 8. 2021, Dallas, Texas. Ashley Grayson, a self-styled business influencer, became the focus of a federal investigation after authorities uncovered evidence of a murder-for-hire plot. Grayson had promoted herself online as a successful entrepreneur, presenting a lifestyle of wealth and confidence to thousands of followers. Behind that public image, investigators determined that she had become involved in a criminal plan aimed at silencing perceived rivals. What began as online disputes soon escalated into action that drew the attention of federal law enforcement. The case began when individuals approached by Grayson reported their interactions to authorities. According to federal records, Grayson had engaged in recorded conversations discussing violent acts against multiple targets. Unbeknownst to her, the individuals she contacted cooperated with law enforcement and agreed to act as informants. Investigators documented meetings, phone calls, and messages in which Grayson allegedly outlined payments and expectations. These recordings formed the foundation of the case, establishing intent and confirming that the discussions went beyond hypothetical statements. Federal agents monitored the situation closely, allowing the conversations to continue long enough to capture clear evidence of planning. Ashley Grayson had built her online presence by marketing courses and motivational content focused on financial success. She portrayed herself as a self-made figure who had overcome obstacles through determination and strategy. As her profile grew, so did conflicts with critics and competitors who questioned her claims. Prosecutors later stated that these disputes intensified over time, leading Grayson to view certain individuals as threats to her reputation and income. The divide between her public messaging of empowerment and the private actions uncovered by investigators became central to the case narrative. Federal investigators compiled surveillance recordings, digital messages, and testimony from cooperating witnesses. Audio and video evidence showed repeated discussions of violent acts and financial arrangements. Agents verified timelines and cross-referenced communications to confirm authenticity. The investigation established that Grayson had taken concrete steps toward carrying out the plan, rather than merely expressing anger or frustration. The collected evidence demonstrated consistency across multiple interactions, leaving little ambiguity about intent. By the time the investigation concluded, prosecutors stated that the case was supported by direct recordings rather than circumstantial inference. Grayson was formally indicted on federal charges related to murder-for-hire. The case proceeded through the court system, where prosecutors presented the recorded evidence in full. The defense challenged aspects of intent, but the recordings and witness cooperation proved decisive. A jury ultimately returned a guilty verdict, concluding that Grayson had knowingly attempted to arrange violent crimes. The conviction marked the collapse of her online persona and business activities, which ended as the legal process advanced. The court sentenced Ashley Grayson to 10 years in federal prison. The judge cited the seriousness of attempting to resolve personal disputes through violence and emphasized deterrence. The sentence brought the case to a close and permanently ended her role as an online influencer. The outcome reinforced the consequences of escalating online rivalries into real-world criminal actions, leaving Grayson's digital brand replaced by a federal conviction and a decade-long term of incarceration. Case 9. March 2021, New York. Jabara Igbara, widely known online as Jay Mazzini, was arrested on federal fraud charges after authorities concluded that his viral generosity videos concealed extensive financial crimes. Igbara had gained popularity by posting clips of himself giving large sums of cash to strangers, presenting an image of wealth, faith, and benevolence. When his arrest became public, investigators confirmed that the money featured in those videos was closely tied to schemes that defrauded investors and followers, shifting his reputation from benefactor to suspect. The case began after multiple investors filed complaints alleging that promised returns on their money never materialized. Victims reported that Igbara had solicited funds under the pretense of short-term investments, assuring them their money would be returned with profit. As complaints accumulated, federal authorities opened an investigation and traced the flow of funds. In March 2021, agents arrested Igbara in New York. Prosecutors stated that the arrest followed months of evidence collection and financial analysis. The timing reflected concerns that additional victims could be harmed if the activity continued unchecked. Jay Mazzini's online persona centered on public acts of generosity, often framed around religious faith and community support. His videos portrayed him as a successful entrepreneur who shared wealth freely, reinforcing trust among followers. Behind that image, investigators determined that Igbara operated multiple fraudulent schemes. These included classic Ponzi-style arrangements, where funds from new investors were used to pay earlier participants, creating the illusion of legitimate returns. Many victims were individuals who trusted him due to shared community ties and the credibility built through his public giveaways. Federal investigators examined bank records, wire transfers, and cryptocurrency transactions linked to Igbara. The analysis revealed repeated instances of wire fraud, forged documents, and falsified payment confirmations sent to victims. Cryptocurrency trails showed that funds sent to Igbara were not returned as promised, but instead redirected or partially repaid using money from other victims. The digital evidence established a consistent pattern across multiple schemes. Investigators concluded that the generosity displayed online was financed through money obtained by deception, rather than lawful business activity. After his arrest, Igbara was charged with wire fraud, conspiracy, and related offenses. In 2024, he entered a guilty plea formally admitting responsibility for the fraudulent schemes. As part of the plea agreement, he agreed to forfeit assets connected to the crimes. Prosecutors presented detailed loss calculations and victim impact summaries, which the court accepted. The plea confirmed that the schemes had operated over an extended period and involved significant financial losses to numerous individuals. The court sentenced Jabara Igbara to 7 years in federal prison and ordered restitution to victims, along with forfeiture of millions of dollars. The sentence reflected both the scale of the fraud and the breach of trust involved. His online presence ended entirely following the conviction. The case became a widely cited example of how social media influence was used to facilitate financial crime, leaving victims to recover losses long after the digital persona that enabled the schemes disappeared. Case 10, May 23, 2018, Tampa, Florida. Cameron Herron, a young car enthusiast with a modest social media following, was charged after a street racing crash killed a mother and her infant child. The collision occurred on a busy waterfront roadway during daytime hours, immediately drawing public attention. What initially appeared to be a tragic traffic accident quickly escalated into a criminal case as investigators determined that excessive speed and illegal racing were involved. Within days, Herron became the central figure in an investigation that would later gain international attention. The incident occurred on Bayshore Boulevard when two vehicles were observed traveling side by side at high speed. At the same time, a 24-year-old woman was crossing the road with her 1-year-old daughter in a stroller. Herron's vehicle struck them with catastrophic force. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, but both victims were pronounced dead at the scene. Police closed the roadway and began documenting evidence, including vehicle damage and roadway markings. Initial findings indicated speeds far above the posted limit. Herron and another driver involved in the racing were taken into custody for questioning, as the investigation began immediately. Cameron Herron had grown up in a stable environment and had recently received a high-performance sports car as a gift. He had posted car-related content on social media, participating in a broader online culture that glorified speed and street racing. While he was not a major influencer, his online activity reflected the same trends seen across automotive-focused platforms. The victims, Jessica Rising-Robinolt and her daughter Lilia, were visiting family in Florida at the time of the crash. They had no connection to Herron and were engaged in a routine activity when their lives were abruptly ended. Investigators conducted a detailed crash reconstruction using vehicle data, roadway measurements, and surveillance footage. Analysis showed that Herron's car was traveling at more than twice the legal speed limit at the time of impact. Witnesses reported seeing the vehicle's racing moments before the collision. Event data recorders confirmed rapid acceleration and minimal braking before impact. The findings established that the crash was not the result of distraction or mechanical failure, but of deliberate high-speed driving. The evidence supported charges related to unlawful racing and vehicular homicide. Herron was formally charged with 2 counts of vehicular homicide. The case proceeded through the Florida court system over several years. Prosecutors argued that the deaths were a foreseeable consequence of illegal street racing. The defense acknowledged responsibility but sought leniency based on Herron's age and lack of prior criminal history. In 2021, the court found Herron guilty on all counts. The conviction confirmed that his actions directly caused the deaths and met the legal standard for criminal liability under Florida law. The court sentenced Cameron Herron to 24 years in state prison. The sentence was among the longest imposed in Florida for a street racing case involving vehicular homicide. The ruling sparked widespread public debate, amplified by social media attention and international coverage. Some viewed the sentence as a necessary deterrent, while others argued it was excessive given Herron's age at the time of the offense. The case influenced local enforcement efforts against street racing and reinforced the legal consequences of reckless driving. The proceedings concluded with a sentence that permanently altered multiple families and left lasting implications for public safety discussions.